The jarring experience. You've heard your voice on a recording, right? And you hated it. Everyone does. You hear it and you think, that's not me. That can't be me. That sounds weird, thin, nasally wrong. You cringe. You want to delete it. You ask, do I really sound like that? And here's the thing that makes it worse. Everyone else says, yeah, that's exactly what you sound like. Your friends, your family, people who've known you for years, they hear that recording and they have zero reaction. To them, it's just you, normal, familiar, the voice they've always heard. But to you, it's like hearing a stranger. This isn't just discomfort. This is cognitive dissonance. This is your brain telling you that something fundamental about your self-perception is wrong. You've been walking around your entire life thinking you sound one way, and suddenly you're confronted with evidence that you sound completely different. And not just a little different, significantly different. Different enough that it doesn't even feel like the same person. Most people never think past this moment. They just accept that recordings are weird, that microphones distort things, that technology somehow gets it wrong. But technology isn't getting it wrong. The microphone is capturing what actually exists in the air, what everyone else hears, what is objectively, measurably, physically real. The question isn't why recordings sound wrong. The question is, why do you think you sound different than you actually do? What are you hearing that nobody else is hearing? And more importantly, why? This isn't about audio quality. It's not about cheap microphones or bad speakers. You can use professional studio equipment, the best microphones money can buy, crystal clear playback, and you'll still hate the sound of your own voice. Because the problem isn't the technology. The problem is that you've been listening to yourself wrong your entire life. And when you understand why, when you really dig into what's happening physically, you discover something fascinating about how sound works, about how your body works, about the hidden mechanics of perception that you never knew were there. Two paths sound takes to your ears. Let's start with something simple. When you speak, sound comes out of your mouth, vibrations in the air. Those vibrations travel outward. They hit other people's ears. They hear you. Straightforward. That's how sound works, right? Fine. But here's what you didn't think about. When you speak, where are your ears? They're right there. On your head. The same head that's producing the sound. So when you speak, sound travels from your mouth through the air around to your ears, and you hear yourself that way. External sound, air conduction, just like everyone else hears you. But that's only half the story, because you're not just hearing the sound that travels through the air. You're also hearing something else, something nobody else can hear. Internal sound, bone conduction. When your vocal cords vibrate, they don't just push air out of your mouth. They vibrate your larynx. Your larynx is connected to your throat. Your throat is connected to your jaw. Your jaw is connected to your skull. And your skull is connected to your inner ear. Everything is physically connected, mechanically coupled, and vibrations travel through all of it. So when you speak, you're creating vibrations that propagate through the solid structures of your head. Through bone, through tissue, through fluid. These vibrations reach your inner ear directly, not through the air, through your skeleton, two completely different paths. Air conduction from outside, bone conduction from inside. And here's the critical part. You hear both simultaneously at the same time. Your brain combines them into one unified perception of your voice. But everyone else, they only hear one path, the air. They don't have access to the bone conduction path. That path only exists for you. It's internal. It's locked inside your skull. It's yours alone. When you listen to a recording, you're only hearing the air conduction path, the external sound, the same thing everyone else hears, but you're missing the bone conduction component. That internal signal that you've been hearing your entire life is suddenly gone, and your voice sounds completely different because it is different. You're hearing half of what you normally hear. This is why the shock is so universal. This is why everyone has the same reaction. It's not psychological. It's not insecurity. It's physics. You are literally hearing something different than what you're used to. The recording isn't lying to you. Your ears have been giving you extra information that doesn't exist in the external world. Bone conduction. Explained. So what is bone conduction exactly? What does it mean for sound to travel through bone? Think about this. Sound is vibration. Fundamentally, that's all it is. Molecules moving back and forth. In air, sound is molecules of nitrogen and oxygen bumping into each other, creating pressure waves that propagate outward. That's air conduction, normal sound. But vibrations don't only travel through air, they travel through anything that can vibrate. Solids, liquids, gases, anything with molecules that can move. And solids are particularly good at transmitting vibrations because the molecules are packed tightly together, mechanically coupled. Your vocal cords are folds of tissue in your larynx. When you speak, air from your lungs pushes through them, they vibrate, and that creates sound. But they're not vibrating in isolation. They're attached to cartilage, the thyroid cartilage, the cricoid cartilage, solid structures that form your voice box. When your vocal cords vibrate, they make the cartilage vibrate. The cartilage makes your larynx vibrate. Your larynx makes your throat vibrate. And it doesn't stop there. Your larynx sits right at the top of your trachea, connected to your hyoid bone. The hyoid is connected to your mandible, your jaw. Your jaw connects to your temporal bone, your skull. Everything is linked, mechanically continuous, and vibrations propagate through this entire structure. Your skull is essentially a resonant chamber. It's a complex geometry of bone, dense, rigid, excellent at conducting vibrations. When your vocal cords create vibrations, those vibrations travel up through your jaw, into your skull, and they reach your cochlea directly. The cochlea is your inner ear, the organ that converts mechanical vibrations into neural signals. It's sitting right there in your temporal bone, embedded in your skull. So the vibrations from your voice don't have to travel through the air, around your head, into your ear canal, vibrate your eardrum, transfer through the tiny bones of your middle ear, and finally reach your cochlea. They can take a shortcut, straight through your skeleton. Direct mechanical coupling from your larynx to your inner ear. This is happening every time you speak, every single time. You've been doing this your entire life, and you never knew it. The vibrations are traveling through your bones while simultaneously traveling through the air. Two signals, two paths, arriving at your cochlea at nearly the same time, combining into your perception of your own voice. And here's what makes this even more interesting. You can test this right now. Just hum at a comfortable pitch. Now, while you're humming, plug your ears, block your ear canals completely. What happens? The sound gets louder, significantly louder. You hear yourself more clearly, not less. Why? Because you've blocked the air conduction path, but the bone conduction path is still wide open. In fact, it's more prominent now because it's the only thing you're hearing. You've isolated the internal signal. This is bone conduction, direct vibration transmission through your skeleton. And it's not a minor effect. It's not a subtle addition. It's a major component of how you hear yourself. Point 4, the physics of vibration transfer. Now let's talk about why bone conduction sounds different than air conduction. Because if it's all just vibrations, if it's all just mechanical waves propagating through different materials, why would the sound be different? This comes down to material properties. How different substances respond to vibrations. And the key properties are density, elasticity, and impedance. Air is a gas, low density. Molecules are far apart. When a sound wave travels through air, it's a pressure wave. Molecules compress and rarefy, propagating the vibration forward. But air is compressible. It's easy to push on air. The speed of sound in air is about 343 meters per second, relatively slow as far as wave propagation goes. Bone is a solid, high density. Molecules are tightly packed in a crystalline lattice structure. When a vibration travels through bone, it's not just a pressure wave, it's a shear wave, a longitudinal wave, multiple modes of vibration propagating simultaneously. And bone is rigid. It resists compression. The speed of sound in bone is much faster, around 4,000 meters per second, more than 10 times faster than air. This difference in propagation speed matters, but it's not the main thing. The main thing is how different materials respond to different frequencies. Every material has a frequency response. Some frequencies travel through it easily. Some frequencies get attenuated, damped out. This is determined by the material's mechanical properties, its stiffness, its internal friction, its resonant modes. Air has a relatively flat frequency response across the range of human hearing. Low frequencies, high frequencies, they all propagate through air pretty well. There's some attenuation at very high frequencies due to molecular absorption. But for normal speech frequencies, 100 Hertz to 8,000 Hertz, air is a good neutral medium. Bone is different. Bone preferentially transmits lower frequencies. The dense, rigid structure of bone is excellent at conducting low-frequency vibrations, the deep, fundamental tones. But higher frequencies, the overtones, the harmonics that give your voice its brightness and clarity, those get damped out. The mechanical impedance of bone is such that high-frequency vibrations don't transfer as efficiently. Think about it this way. If you tap on a piece of wood, you get a dull thud. Low frequencies. If you tap on a piece of metal, you get a sharp ping. High frequencies, different materials, different frequency responses. Same principle here. Your skull is bone, dense, thick bone. When vibrations from your vocal cords travel through your skull to your inner ear, the low frequencies make the journey easily. The high frequencies get partially absorbed, scattered, damped by the mechanical properties of the bone itself. So the bone conduction signal that reaches your cochlea is not a faithful reproduction of your voice. It's a filtered version, low frequency enhanced, high frequency attenuated, bass heavy. This is not an opinion. This is measurable. You can put accelerometers on someone's skull, measure the vibrations, and see exactly how the frequency response differs from the air conduction signal. Frequency response differences. So let's put this together. When you speak, you hear two signals. The air conduction signal carries the full frequency spectrum of your voice. Lows, mids, highs, all the harmonics, all the overtones. This is what a microphone picks up. This is what everyone else hears. The bone conduction signal carries a bass boosted version of your voice. The fundamental frequencies, the low tones, they come through loud and clear. But the higher frequencies, the ones that give your voice its brightness, its clarity, its characteristic timbre, those are reduced. Your brain combines these two signals. It doesn't hear them separately. It integrates them into one unified perception. And because the bone conduction signal emphasizes the lows, your overall perception of your voice is deeper, richer, warmer than it actually is in the external world. This is why your recorded voice sounds thin. It's not that the recording is bad. It's that you're missing the bass boost you're used to. The bone conduction component that's been adding low frequency weight to your voice your entire life is suddenly absent. You're hearing yourself the way you actually sound in air without the internal reinforcement, and it sounds wrong because you've never heard yourself this way before. Let me give you some numbers. The fundamental frequency of an adult male voice is typically around 100 to 150 hertz. For an adult female, it's around 200 to 250 hertz. These are the low frequencies, the baseline pitch. Bone conduction emphasizes exactly this range. It makes your fundamental frequency more prominent in your own perception. But the frequencies that give your voice its character, its recognizability, those are higher. The formants, the resonant frequencies of your vocal tract that distinguish one vowel from another, one person from another, those are typically between 500 hertz and 3000 hertz. Bone conduction doesn't emphasize these as much. In fact, it can attenuate them by 10 to 20 decibels depending on the frequency. So when you hear yourself speak, you're hearing an enhanced fundamental with reduced formants, deeper but less distinct. When you hear a recording, you're hearing the formants clearly but without the bass boost, thinner but more accurate to what exists externally. And here's the thing that really drives this home. Other people recognize your voice from recordings immediately. No hesitation, because the recording captures what they've always heard. The air conduction signal, the external sound, that's their reference. But you don't recognize your own voice because your reference is different. Your reference includes the bone conduction component. You've been hearing a version of your voice that nobody else has access to, a private signal, an internal soundtrack that's been playing your entire life. When that signal is suddenly removed, when you hear only the external component, it's like looking in a mirror and seeing a stranger. Not because the mirror is wrong, but because you've never seen yourself from that angle before. The recording is showing you the truth, the objective, external truth, and it doesn't match your internal experience. This is the frequency response difference. This is why your voice sounds different on recording. Not because of technology, not because of audio quality, because you've been listening to a fundamentally different signal than everyone else your entire life, and you never knew it. The recording captures only air conduction. So here's the fundamental problem with recordings. And it's not a problem with the technology, it's a problem with physics. Microphones pick up vibrations in air. That's what they do, that's all they can do. A microphone is basically a tiny diaphragm, a membrane that moves when air pressure changes hit it. Sound waves are pressure variations traveling through air. Those pressure variations push on the diaphragm moves. That movement gets converted to an electrical signal, and that signal becomes your recording. The microphone is capturing the air conduction path, the external sound, the vibrations that propagated through the air from your mouth to the microphone. But the bone conduction path, the vibrations traveling through your skeleton, those never make it into the air in any significant way. They stay internal. They're trapped inside your skull, propagating through solid tissue and bone, reaching your cochlea directly. And because they never enter the air as sound waves, the microphone never sees them, can't see them. There's nothing for the diaphragm to respond to. Think about what this means. Every recording device ever made, tape recorders, digital recorders, smartphones, professional studio microphones, they all work the same basic way. They all measure pressure variations in air. They all capture the air conduction signal. And they all completely miss the bone conduction component. This isn't a flaw in microphone design. You can't fix this with better technology. You can't build a microphone that picks up bone conduction from outside your body, because bone conduction doesn't exist outside your body. It's internal. The vibrations are propagating through your skeleton. To capture them, you'd need to attach the sensor directly to your skull. And even then, you wouldn't be capturing sound. You'd be capturing mechanical vibrations in bone, which is a different thing entirely. So when you record yourself and play it back, what are you hearing? Only the air conduction path, only the external signal, only the sound that existed in the air. This is the same signal everyone else hears when you speak, because everyone else is also only hearing the air conduction path. They don't have access to your bone conduction. That's yours alone. But you're used to hearing both. Your entire life, every time you've spoken, you've heard the combination. Air conduction plus bone conduction. Full spectrum plus bass boost. External signal plus internal reinforcement. And that combined signal is what your brain has stored as my voice. When the recording plays back only the air conduction component, you're hearing approximately half of what you're used to. And not just any half, you're missing the specific half that makes your voice sound deeper and richer to yourself. The bone conduction component that emphasizes the fundamental frequencies, that adds warmth and body to your perception. The recording sounds thin because it is thinner than what you normally hear. It's missing an entire signal path. It's not that the microphone is doing something wrong, it's that the microphone is doing exactly what it's designed to do, capturing the sound that exists in the external world. And that sound is fundamentally different from your internal experience. This is why you can spend thousands on professional recording equipment, and you'll still think your voice sounds wrong. The problem isn't the quality of the recording. The problem is that no recording, no matter how high fidelity, can capture something that never existed as sound waves in the air. Bone conduction is invisible to microphones. Always has been, always will be, and this is why everyone else says, that sounds exactly like you. Because it does. To them, because they've only ever heard the air conduction path. The recording matches their reference perfectly, but it doesn't match your reference, and it never will. Feynman's principle of wave superposition. Now let's talk about what's actually happening when these two signals reach your ear, because this isn't just two sounds playing at the same time. This is wave superposition. And wave superposition is one of the most fundamental principles in physics. Feynman explained this beautifully. When two waves meet at the same point in space, they don't bounce off each other. They don't interfere with each other in the sense of blocking or canceling. They add, mathematically, the displacement at any point is the sum of the displacements from each individual wave. This is the principle of superposition, and it applies to all waves, water waves, light waves, sound waves, vibrations in any medium. When you speak, the air conduction sound reaches your eardrum. Pressure waves in the air cause your eardrum to vibrate. Those vibrations transfer through the ossicles, the three tiny bones in your middle ear, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, and reach your cochlea. That's one signal. One pattern of vibrations. Simultaneously, the bone conduction vibrations are traveling through your skull, reaching your cochlea directly through the temporal bone. That's a second signal. a second pattern of vibrations, and both signals arrive at your cochlea at nearly the same time. Nearly, but not exactly, and this is important. Your cochlea doesn't process these as separate signals. It can't. It's just a mechanical device, essentially. A fluid-filled spiral chamber lined with hair cells that respond to vibrations at different frequencies. When vibrations reach the cochlea, the hair cells bend, they trigger neural signals, and your brain interprets those signals as sound. But the cochlea doesn't know where the vibrations came from. It doesn't distinguish between air conduction and bone conduction. It just responds to the total vibration pattern it receives. And the total vibration pattern is the sum of the two signals. Wave superposition. The air conduction wave plus the bone conduction wave combine mathematically at every frequency, at every moment in time. Here's where it gets interesting. When two waves combine, the result depends on their relative phase. If two waves are in phase, crests align with crests, troughs with troughs, they add constructively. The combined amplitude is larger than either wave alone. If they're out of phase, crests align with troughs, they add destructively. They partially cancel. The combined amplitude is smaller. In your case, the air conduction and bone conduction signals are mostly in phase at low frequencies. They're both coming from the same source, your vocal cords, so they start in phase. And at low frequencies, the wavelengths are long, the timing differences are small relative to the period of oscillation, so they stay roughly in phase as they propagate through different media. When they combine in your cochlea, they add constructively. The low frequencies get reinforced, louder, more prominent. But at higher frequencies, the situation's more complex. The wavelengths are shorter. Small timing differences become significant phase shifts. And remember, sound travels at different speeds through bone versus air. The bone conduction signal arrives slightly earlier because it's traveling through a denser medium at a faster speed, and it's taking a shorter path, straight through your skull instead of around your head through the air. So at higher frequencies, the two signals might not be perfectly in phase when they meet at your cochlea. Depending on the exact path lengths and propagation speeds, you can get partial constructive interference, partial destructive interference, or anything in between. This creates a complex frequency response. Some frequencies get enhanced, some get reduced, some stay neutral. But here's the key insight. Your brain doesn't hear the air conduction signal separately from the bone conduction signal. It hears the superposition, the combined result, and that combined result has been shaped by wave interference, by the constructive and destructive addition of two signals with different frequency responses, different amplitudes, different phases. This is what Feynman would tell you. When you hear your own voice, you're not hearing two things. You're hearing one thing that's the mathematical sum of two sources. And that sum has properties that neither source has on its own. It's richer at low frequencies because of constructive interference. It's more complex at mid and high frequencies because of varying phase relationships. It's a unique signal that exists only for you, only in your cochlea, because only you have access to both component waves. The recording doesn't capture this, can't capture this, because the superposition happens inside your ear. The recording captures one component wave, the air conduction signal, before it has a chance to combine with the bone conduction signal. And when you play back that recording, you're hearing only that one component without the superposition, without the wave interference that's been shaping your perception your entire life. Resonance in your skull as an acoustic chamber. Let's talk about resonance, because your skull isn't just a passive conductor of vibrations. It's an active participant in shaping the sound you hear. Your head is an acoustic chamber, and like any chamber, it has resonant frequencies. What's a resonant frequency? It's a frequency at which a system naturally vibrates with maximum amplitude. Every object has resonant frequencies determined by its size, shape, and material properties. When you excite an object at its resonant frequency, even a small input produces a large output. The system amplifies that frequency. A guitar string has a resonant frequency. Pluck it, it vibrates at a specific pitch determined by its length, tension, and mass. A wine glass has resonant frequencies. Tap it, you hear a clear tone. Drive it at that frequency with sound waves, it vibrates more and more until it can shatter. This is resonance. Your skull is a complex three-dimensional structure. Bone with varying thickness, irregular geometry, air-filled cavities like your sinuses, fluid-filled spaces like your cochlea. And this entire structure has resonant modes. Multiple resonant frequencies at which different parts of your skull vibrate more readily than at other frequencies. When your vocal cords vibrate and those vibrations propagate through your jaw into your skull, they're not just passing through, they're exciting the resonant modes of your skull. Frequencies that match the resonant frequencies get amplified. Frequencies that don't match get partially damped. Your skull acts like a filter, an equalizer, boosting some frequencies and reducing others based on its mechanical properties. And here's what's fascinating. The resonant frequencies of your skull are in the low to mid-frequency range. Roughly 200 Hz to 1000 Hz, depending on skull size, bone density, individual anatomy. This is right in the range of human speech, right in the range where your voice has most of its energy. So when you speak, certain frequencies in your voice are getting resonantly amplified by your skull itself. Your head is literally ringing at those frequencies, not loudly, not audibly to others, but mechanically, structurally. The bone is vibrating at larger amplitudes at resonant frequencies than at non-resonant frequencies. And those amplified vibrations reach your cochlea. They contribute to the bone conduction signal. They add to your perception of your own voice. This is why bone conduction doesn't just emphasize low frequencies in general. It specifically emphasizes frequencies that match your skull's resonant modes. And those frequencies vary from person to person because everyone's skull is slightly different in size and shape. Think about what this means. Part of the bass boost you hear in your own voice isn't just from bone conduction in general. It's from resonant amplification specific to your skull geometry. Your head is acting like a resonance chamber, like the body of a guitar, enhancing certain frequencies in your voice. But microphones don't capture this. A microphone placed outside your head measures sound waves in air. It doesn't measure the resonant vibrations of your skull. Those vibrations are internal. They're affecting the bone conduction signal path, not the air conduction signal path. The resonance is happening inside your head, and it only affects what you hear, not what others hear. This is another layer of difference between your perception and reality. Not only are you hearing a bone conduction signal that others don't hear, but that bone conduction signal is being shaped by the resonant properties of your skull. Frequencies are being amplified or damped based on the specific geometry of your head. The sound you hear is customized to your anatomy in a way that's completely invisible to any external observer. And there's more. Your sinuses, your nasal cavity, your oral cavity, these are also resonant chambers. When you speak, they resonate at certain frequencies, and those resonances affect both the sound that comes out of your mouth and the vibrations that propagate through your skull. This is why your voice sounds different when you have a cold, when your sinuses are congested. The resonant properties change, the frequency response changes, and you hear it immediately because the resonance affects the bone conduction path. But others might barely notice the difference because the air conduction signal is less affected by sinus resonance. They're hearing the sound after it's already left your mouth, after it's already propagated through air. You're hearing it while it's still inside your head, while it's still interacting with your resonant cavities. Your skull is not a neutral transmission medium. It's an active acoustic filter with frequency-dependent gain. And that filter is shaping your perception of your own voice in ways you've never consciously noticed, but that have been affecting you every time you've spoken your entire life. The speed of sound in different media. Now let's talk about timing, because sound doesn't travel at the same speed through different materials. And when two signals take different paths through different media, they arrive at different times, and timing matters. The speed of sound in air at room temperature is about 343 meters per second. This is well established. Sound is a pressure wave, a compression and rarefaction of air molecules propagating forward. 343 meters per second. Relatively slow compared to other wave phenomena. The speed of sound in bone is approximately 4,000 meters per second, more than 10 times faster. Why? Because bone is dense and rigid. The molecules are tightly packed, strongly coupled. When one part of the bone vibrates, that vibration propagates to adjacent parts very quickly. The restoring forces are strong, the inertia is manageable relative to the coupling, and waves travel fast. So when you speak, vibrations from your vocal cords start propagating along two paths simultaneously. The air conduction path. Sound waves travel from your larynx out through your mouth, through the air around your head into your ear canal, about 20 centimeters total distance at 343 meters per second. That takes roughly 0.6 milliseconds. The bone conduction path. Vibrations travel from your larynx, through your jaw, through your skull, directly to your cochlea embedded in your temporal bone. Much shorter distance, maybe 10 centimeters of bone, at 4,000 meters per second. That takes roughly 0.025 milliseconds. Wait, the bone conduction signal arrives first, significantly earlier, about half a millisecond earlier. That's not much in absolute terms, but in terms of sound perception, it's actually noticeable. Here's why this matters. Your cochlea processes sound with remarkable time resolution. It can detect differences in arrival time of a fraction of a millisecond. This is how you localize sound. Your brain compares the arrival time of sound at your left ear versus your right ear, differences of just a few hundred microseconds, and uses that to figure out which direction the sound came from. When the bone conduction signal arrives at your cochlea a few hundred microseconds before the air conduction signal, your brain processes them as one event, but the phase relationship between them depends on the frequency. At low frequencies, a half millisecond delay is a small fraction of the wave period. A 200 Hz wave has a period of 5 milliseconds. A 0.5 millisecond delay is only a 10% phase shift. The two signals are still mostly in phase. They add constructively. But at higher frequencies, the same time delay represents a larger phase shift. A 2000 Hz wave has a period of 0.5 milliseconds. A 0.5 millisecond delay is a full 360-degree phase shift. Depending on the exact timing, you could get constructive interference, destructive interference, or anything in between. This is called phase interference, and it creates a comb filter effect. Certain frequencies get enhanced. Certain frequencies get reduced. The pattern depends on the time delay between the two signals and the frequencies involved. And this pattern is part of your perception of your own voice. But here's the thing. This comb filtering, this phase interference from the timing difference between air and bone conduction, it's unique to your anatomy. The exact path length through your skull, the exact distance from your larynx to your cochlea, the exact speed of sound through your specific bone density. These determine the precise timing delay, which determines the precise pattern of interference. Someone else with a different skull size, different bone density, different anatomy, they'd have a different timing delay, different phase relationships, different interference pattern. Even if you had the exact same voice as someone else, you'd hear yourself differently than they hear themselves, because the bone conduction timing would be different. And recording devices, they don't capture any of this. They capture one signal, the air conduction signal, no timing delay, no phase interference from multiple paths, just the external sound arriving at the microphone whenever it arrives based on the distance from your mouth to the microphone. When you play back that recording, you're hearing a signal without the complex phase relationships you're used to, without the comb filtering, without the interference pattern that's been shaping your perception. It's a simpler signal, a cleaner signal in some ways, but a different signal, missing the temporal complexity of the superposition of two paths with different propagation speeds. Impedance matching and energy transfer. Now let's get into something more technical, impedance. Because impedance determines how efficiently energy transfers from one medium to another, and energy transfer efficiency determines how much of the signal actually makes it through. Acoustic impedance is a property of a material that describes how much it resists the propagation of sound. Mathematically, it's the product of the material's density and the speed of sound in that material. High impedance means the material strongly resists being set into motion by sound waves. Low impedance means it moves easily. Air has low acoustic impedance, about 400 rails if you want the actual number. Air is easy to push around. Sound waves propagate through air readily because air molecules don't resist the compression and rarefaction very much. Bone has high acoustic impedance, about 6 million rails. Bone is hard to set into motion. It's dense, it's rigid, it takes significant force to create vibrations in bone. But once it's vibrating, the vibrations propagate efficiently because the molecules are tightly coupled. Now here's the critical principle. When a wave traveling through one medium encounters a boundary with another medium, the amount of energy that transmits through versus reflects back depends on the impedance mismatch between the two materials. If the impedances are similar, most of the energy transmits. If the impedances are very different, most of the energy reflects. This is why sound transmission through air to solid boundaries is inefficient. When sound in air hits a wall, most of it reflects back. Only a small fraction transmits through the wall. The impedance mismatch between air and solid is enormous, a factor of tens of thousands. Energy doesn't transfer well across that boundary. Your eardrum is exactly this kind of boundary. Air to solid. Sound waves in your ear canal hit your eardrum, and most of that energy would reflect back if it weren't for a clever mechanical solution. The ossicles, those 3 tiny bones in your middle ear, act as an impedance matching system. They're arranged in a lever system that amplifies the force and reduces the velocity, effectively transforming the impedance to bridge the gap between air and the fluid in your cochlea. But even with this impedance matching, there's still significant energy loss at the air-eardrum boundary. Now compare that to bone conduction. Vibrations in your jaw transfer directly to vibrations in your skull. Bone to bone, continuous solid medium, no boundary, no impedance mismatch. The impedance is the same throughout because it's all the same material. Energy transfers with near perfect efficiency. This is why bone conduction is so effective, even though the vibrations from your vocal cords are relatively weak compared to the sound waves coming out of your mouth. The bone conduction path has no lossy boundaries. The vibrations propagate through your skeleton with minimal energy loss until they reach your cochlea. And at the cochlea, they transfer into the fluid of the inner ear. But this is a solid to fluid boundary, not air to solid. The impedance mismatch is smaller. The transfer is more efficient. Air conduction has to cross the air-eardrum boundary. Energy loss, reflection. Only a fraction of the sound energy actually makes it to your cochlea. Bone conduction bypasses this entirely. Direct coupling from solid to fluid. Much more efficient at low frequencies where the mechanical coupling is strongest. This is another reason why bone conduction emphasizes low frequencies in your perception. Low frequency vibrations transfer efficiently through solid media. The mechanical coupling is good. The impedance is manageable. High frequency vibrations don't couple as well through bone because the shorter wavelengths and higher frequencies mean more opportunities for scattering, absorption, and phase cancellation in the complex geometry of your skull. So not only does bone have a frequency-dependent response due to its material properties, but the impedance matching also favors low frequencies. Everything about the bone conduction path is optimized, or at least biased, toward transmitting the fundamental tones, the bass frequencies, the low end of your voice. And the air conduction path? It's more neutral. Air doesn't care about frequency as much. The impedance of air doesn't vary dramatically with frequency in the speech range, so the air conduction signal carries the full spectrum more evenly. When you combine these two paths, the bass-heavy, efficiently coupled bone conduction signal and the full spectrum impedance mismatched air conduction signal, you get a perception that's weighted toward the lows. More bass, deeper tone, richer sound. The recording only has the air conduction path. And that path by itself is thinner, not because it's missing information, but because it's missing the efficiently coupled low-frequency reinforcement from the bone conduction path. The impedance physics ensures that bone conduction delivers a strong low-frequency signal to your cochlea, and that signal is completely absent from any recording. The anatomy of your hearing system. Let's talk about your ear. Actually, let's talk about your entire hearing system, because it's not just an ear, it's a mechanical to neural converter. It's an incredibly sophisticated piece of engineering that's been processing two completely different signal paths simultaneously your entire life without you ever knowing it. Start with the outer ear. The pinna, that weird fleshy structure on the side of your head that most people just call ear. It's not decorative. It's an acoustic antenna. It collects sound waves from the environment, and its shape creates direction-dependent filtering. Sound from in front of you sounds different than sound from behind you because the pinna shapes the frequency response differently based on angle. This helps you localize sound. The sound waves funnel into your ear canal. The ear canal is about 2.5 centimeters long, and it acts as a resonant tube. It amplifies frequencies around 3000 hertz, which happens to be right in the range where human speech carries a lot of information. Not a coincidence. Evolution tuned this. At the end of the ear canal is your eardrum, the tympanic membrane, a thin cone-shaped piece of tissue about 8 millimeters across. Sound waves hit it. Pressure variations make it vibrate, and those vibrations are the mechanical input to your middle ear. The middle ear is an air-filled chamber containing 3 tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, hammer, anvil, stirrup, the smallest bones in your body. The malleus is attached to the eardrum. The stapes is attached to the oval window, which is the entrance to your inner ear. The incus connects them. These 3 bones form a lever system. When the eardrum vibrates, the malleus moves, which moves the incus, which moves the stapes. But it's not just a straight mechanical linkage. It's an impedance matching transformer. The eardrum has a large surface area. The oval window has a much smaller surface area. The force gets concentrated. The pressure increases by a factor of about 20. This is critical. The inner ear is fluid-filled. Fluid has much higher impedance than air. If sound waves in air hit fluid directly, most of the energy would reflect back. You'd barely hear anything. The ossicles solve this problem. They match the impedance between air and fluid by concentrating the force, increasing the pressure, transforming the mechanical properties of the vibration to efficiently transfer energy across the boundary. Now the inner ear, the cochlea, a spiral structure about 3.5 centimeters long if you uncoil it, filled with fluid, divided into 3 chambers by membranes. The key structure is the basilar membrane. It's lined with hair cells, about 16,000 of them in each ear. The basilar membrane is not uniform. It's wider and floppier at one end, narrower and stiffer at the other. This creates a frequency gradient. High frequencies cause maximum vibration at the stiff end near the oval window. Low frequencies cause maximum vibration at the floppy end at the apex of the spiral. This is called tonotopic organization. Different locations along the basilar membrane respond to different frequencies. When vibrations from the stapes enter the cochlea through the oval window, they create pressure waves in the fluid. These waves travel along the cochlea, causing the basilar membrane to vibrate. At each point along the membrane, the hair cells detect the vibration. When the hair cells move, they open ion channels, which triggers electrical signals in the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve carries these signals to your brain. About 30,000 nerve fibers in each ear, each one connected to a specific location on the basilar membrane, each one carrying information about a specific frequency range. Your brain receives this frequency decomposed signal and reconstructs it into your perception of sound. That's the air conduction path. Sound in air, eardrum, ossicles, oval window, fluid waves in cochlea, basilar membrane, hair cells, nerve signals, brain. Now here's what you need to understand. The bone conduction path bypasses almost all of this. When vibrations travel through your skull, they reach the temporal bone. The cochlea is embedded in the temporal bone. The vibrations in the bone directly cause vibrations in the fluid inside the cochlea. No eardrum, no ossicles, no oval window. Direct mechanical coupling from bone to cochlear fluid. The basilar membrane doesn't care how the fluid started vibrating. It just responds to the vibrations. The hair cells don't know whether the vibration came from air conduction or bone conduction. They just detect mechanical motion and fire neural signals. So both paths, air conduction and bone conduction, end up exciting the same hair cells, triggering the same auditory nerve fibers, sending signals to the same auditory cortex in your brain. The cochlea is the common endpoint, the final processor. It receives input from both paths and doesn't distinguish between them. But here's the crucial detail. The two paths excite the cochlea differently. The air conduction path enters through the oval window at the base of the cochlea, creating fluid waves that propagate along the length of the basilar membrane in the normal way. High frequencies near the base, low frequencies at the apex. The bone conduction path excites the entire cochlea simultaneously. The vibrations in the temporal bone cause the whole cochlear structure to vibrate. This creates a different pattern of fluid motion inside. It's not a traveling wave starting from one end. It's a bulk vibration of the entire structure. And because the basilar membrane has that frequency gradient, stiff at the base, floppy at the apex, the bulk vibration excites different parts of the membrane with different efficiency. The floppy, low-frequency end responds more readily to the bulk vibration. The stiff, high-frequency end responds less. This is why bone conduction emphasizes low frequencies. The anatomy of the cochlea itself creates this frequency-dependent response to bulk vibration. Your auditory nerve doesn't get two separate signals. It gets one combined signal from hair cells that are responding to both air-conducted and bone-conducted vibrations simultaneously. The superposition happens mechanically at the level of the basilar membrane. The hair cells move in response to the total vibration, which is the sum of the contributions from both paths. And your brain receives this combined signal and interprets it as your voice. It has no idea that it's processing two different physical inputs. It just knows that certain frequencies are more prominent than others. Certain patterns are present, and it constructs your perception from that. This is why you can't turn off bone conduction. It's not a separate auditory channel. It's not something your brain processes independently. It's baked into the signal at the mechanical level before it even becomes neural. The bone-conducted vibrations and air-conducted vibrations combine in the physics of the cochlea, and what your brain receives is already the superposition. When you hear a recording, the same cochlea, the same hair cells, the same auditory nerve are processing the signal. But now there's only one input, only air conduction. The bone conduction component is absent. The basilar membrane vibrates differently. The pattern of hair cell activation is different. The neural signal is different. And your brain, which has spent your entire life processing a combined signal, suddenly receives a signal that's missing a major component. No wonder it sounds wrong. Why everyone else hears the real. So let's establish something clearly. When other people hear you speak, what are they hearing? They're hearing air-conducted sound. That's it. That's all. Sound comes out of your mouth. It propagates through air. It reaches their ears. Their eardrums vibrate. Their ossicles transfer the vibrations. Their cochlea process it. Their brains perceive it. One path. Air conduction, external sound. They don't have access to your bone conduction. They can't. Bone conduction is internal to your skull. The vibrations are propagating through your skeleton, reaching your cochlea from inside. There's no way for those vibrations to jump from your bones into the air and then into someone else's ears. It doesn't work that way. So every person you've ever spoken to has only heard the air-conducted version of your voice. Your parents, your friends, your partners, everyone. They've only ever heard what the microphone captures. The external signal, the full spectrum, unbiased by bone conduction version of your voice. And here's the thing, to them, that is your voice. That's their reference. That's what they've associated with you. When they hear a recording of you, they hear exactly what they always hear. No disconnect, no shock. It's just you, but you have a different reference. You've been hearing the combined signal, air conduction plus bone conduction, and that combined signal has properties that the air-conducted signal alone doesn't have. Deeper fundamental frequencies, enhanced bass, different timbral characteristics due to skull resonance and phase interference. So who's hearing the real you? The answer is everyone else. Not because their perception is more valid philosophically, but because the air-conducted signal is the one that exists in the external world. It's the signal that can be measured by instruments. It's the signal that propagates through space and can be heard by anyone in the room. It's objective, it's reproducible. It's what actually exists as sound waves in the environment. Your perception includes a private signal, a signal that only you have access to, an internal acoustic phenomenon that doesn't exist for anyone else. And that signal is not the real you in the sense of what you sound like to the world. It's just what you sound like to yourself. Think about what this means. You've spent your entire life thinking you sound a certain way, but you don't, not to anyone else. You've been carrying around a false perception of your own voice, not because you're delusional, not because you're bad at listening, but because you have access to information that nobody else has. Bone conduction, internal vibrations, skull resonance, and that information has been shaping your perception in ways you never consciously noticed. When someone tells you that recording sounds exactly like you, they're not being polite. They're not lying to make you feel better. They're telling you the truth. That is what you sound like. That is the voice they've always heard, the voice they recognize instantly, the voice they associate with you. The disconnect is entirely on your side. You're the one with the distorted perception. And distorted here doesn't mean wrong in an absolute sense. It just means different from what exists externally. You're hearing something that's not available to others. And because of that, your self-perception doesn't match reality. Now here's where it gets interesting. Some people, when they hear their recorded voice and hate it, they try to change their voice. They try to speak differently, to make their voice sound more like what they think it should sound like. But this is backwards. This is trying to change reality to match your internal perception. What you should be doing is updating your internal perception to match reality. The recording is showing you what you actually sound like, not what you wish you sounded like, not what you think you sound like based on flawed internal feedback. What you actually sound like to the billions of people who don't have access to your bone conduction. And once you accept this, once you listen to enough recordings of yourself and recalibrate your expectation, something interesting happens. You stop hating your recorded voice. Not because it changes, but because your reference changes. Your brain starts associating the recorded voice with me instead of wrong. And eventually you can listen to a recording and just hear yourself without the cognitive dissonance. But most people never get there because they don't understand what's happening. They just think recordings sound bad, or microphones are weird, or they have a bad voice for recording. None of that is true. The recording is fine. The microphone is fine. Your voice is fine. Your perception is what's off. And it's off for a very specific, physical, understandable reason. Everyone else has been hearing the real you all along. The version without bone conduction. The version that exists in air. The version that can be recorded and played back, that's you. That's what you sound like. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop being shocked every time you hear your own voice. The psychological disconnect. Now let's talk about what's happening in your brain, because this isn't just a physics problem, it's a neuroscience problem. Your brain has built a model of yourself, and part of that model is your voice. And that model is wrong. Your brain constructs your self-perception from sensory input. What you look like, what you sound like, what you feel like, these are all learned. Your brain doesn't have direct access to objective reality. It just has the signals coming from your sensory organs, and it builds a model based on those signals. Every time you speak, you hear yourself through bone conduction and air conduction simultaneously. That combined signal gets processed by your auditory cortex. And over years, over millions of instances of speaking and hearing yourself, your brain learns a pattern. It learns what my voice sounds like, and it stores that pattern as part of your self-model. This is not a conscious process. You don't decide what your voice sounds like to you. Your brain just accumulates data from repeated exposure and builds a statistical representation. And that representation includes the bone conduction component, because the bone conduction component has always been there in every single instance of you hearing yourself speak. Now here's the problem. That representation doesn't match external reality. It matches your internal experience, which is biased by bone conduction. So your brain has built a model of my voice that's fundamentally different from what your voice actually sounds like to others. This is fine as long as you never have to confront the discrepancy. You go through life hearing yourself with bone conduction. Everyone else hears you without bone conduction, and there's no conflict because you never hear what they hear. But then you hear a recording, and suddenly your brain receives auditory input that's labeled as me, but doesn't match the stored pattern. The recording says this is you speaking, but the auditory features don't match what your brain has learned to associate with my voice. This is cognitive dissonance, a mismatch between expectation and reality. Your brain expected one pattern and received a different pattern, and this creates a sense of wrongness, of unfamiliarity, even though the recording is objectively accurate. Here's what's happening neurologically. Your brain has neurons in the auditory cortex that respond to specific features of your voice, specific frequency patterns, specific timbral characteristics, specific formant structures. These neurons have been tuned through experience to fire strongly when you hear yourself speak. They recognize my voice as a distinct category, separate from other voices. But those neurons were tuned using the combined air plus bone signal. They learn to expect a certain bass boost, a certain resonance pattern, a certain set of acoustic features that include bone conduction. When you hear a recording, the air-only signal activates those neurons differently. The pattern is close, but not quite right. Some features match, some don't. The neurons fire, but not with the same confidence, the same clarity. Your brain interprets this as not quite me, or me but wrong. Or is that really me? There's uncertainty, confusion, and that confusion is uncomfortable. This is actually similar to what happens when you see yourself in a photograph or video. You have a stored visual model of what you look like, built primarily from looking in mirrors. But mirrors show you a reversed image. Left is right, right is left. When you see a photograph, the image is not reversed. It's what everyone else sees. And it looks slightly off to you because your brain's model was built from mirror images. The difference is that most people eventually get used to how they look in photos because they see photos of themselves frequently. They accumulate enough data with the non-mirrored image that their brain updates the model, or at least creates an alternative model for me in photos. But with voice, most people don't hear recordings of themselves frequently enough for their brain to update. They encounter their recorded voice occasionally. They're shocked every time, and they never build a new model. The bone-conducted version remains the dominant reference. And there's another layer to this. Your voice is tied to your identity. It's one of the most personal, distinctive characteristics you have. You use it constantly. It's how you express yourself. It's how others recognize you. Your brain doesn't just store my voice as a neutral acoustic pattern. It stores it as part of me, part of your sense of self. When that pattern is violated, when you hear your recorded voice and it doesn't match, you're not just experiencing auditory confusion, you're experiencing identity confusion. That doesn't sound like me is not just a statement about sound, it's a statement about self-concept. The recording is challenging your brain's model of who you are. This is why the reaction is so visceral. This is why people hate their recorded voice. It's not just that it sounds bad, it's that it threatens their sense of self. It suggests that the way they've perceived themselves is wrong. And nobody likes being told they're wrong about themselves. But here's the truth. Your brain's model is not reality. It's a model of your sensory experience. And your sensory experience is biased by internal signals that don't exist externally. The recording is giving you access to external reality, to what you actually sound like to others. And your brain resists this information because it contradicts the model built from internal experience. The only way to resolve this cognitive dissonance is to update the model. To listen to your recorded voice enough times that your brain builds a new association. To consciously remind yourself that this is what you actually sound like. To accept that your internal perception was biased and that the recording is showing you the truth. Some people never do this. They avoid recordings. They cringe every time they hear themselves. They maintain the cognitive dissonance indefinitely. But you can resolve it. You can retrain your brain. It just requires exposure and acceptance. Listen to recordings, recognize them as accurate, update your self-model, and eventually the disconnect disappears. Formants and vocal tract filtering. Let's talk about what actually makes your voice sound like you. Because it's not just the fundamental frequency, it's not just the pitch, it's the formants. And formants are all about filtering. When your vocal cords vibrate, they create a complex periodic sound. It's not a pure sine wave, it's a fundamental frequency plus harmonics. If your vocal cords are vibrating at 100 hertz, they're also creating energy at 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 400 hertz, and so on. All the integer multiples of the fundamental. This is called a harmonic series. It's the raw sound source. But that raw sound doesn't come straight out of your mouth. It passes through your vocal tract, your throat, your mouth, your nasal cavity. And these are resonant chambers. They filter the sound. They amplify some frequencies and attenuate others based on their geometry. The resonant frequencies of your vocal tract are called formants, and formants are what give speech its characteristic sound. They're what distinguish one vowel from another. They're what make your voice sound different from someone else's voice, even if you're speaking at the same pitch. Think about it this way. Your vocal tract is a tube. One end is your vocal cords. The other end is your lips. The length and shape of this tube determine its resonant frequencies. When you change the shape of your mouth, when you move your tongue, When you open or close your jaw, you change the geometry of the tube, you change the formants. Say ah, then say e. Same vocal cord vibration, different mouth shape. The formants shift. Ah has a low first formant and a low second formant. EE has a low first formant and a high second formant. Your brain recognizes these formant patterns as different vowels. Now here's what's important. Formants are properties of the vocal tract, not the vocal cords. They're filtering. The vocal cords provide the source, the harmonic series. The vocal tract filters it, emphasizes certain harmonics, creates the formant structure, and formants are mostly in the mid to high frequency range. The first formant is typically between 300 Hz and 1000 Hz. The second formant is between 1000 Hz and 3000 Hz. The third formant is above 2000 Hz. These are the frequencies that carry the information that makes speech intelligible. These are the frequencies that make you sound like you. Now remember what we said about bone conduction. Bone conduction emphasizes low frequencies. It attenuates high frequencies. So bone conduction is giving you a strong fundamental, strong low harmonics, but reduced formant information. Air conduction carries the full spectrum, the fundamental, all the harmonics, and clear formant structure. This is what everyone else hears. This is what makes your voice recognizable as you. When you hear yourself speak, you're getting strong, low frequencies from bone conduction, plus full spectrum formant information from air conduction. The combination sounds rich, full, deep, because the bass is enhanced, but the formants are still there from air conduction, so you can still understand yourself, still hear the vowels and consonants clearly. When you hear a recording, you're only getting the air conduction signal. The formants are there. The speech information is there, but the bass boost is gone. The fundamental and low harmonics are at their actual levels, not enhanced by bone conduction. So your voice sounds thinner, more focused on the formants, less weighted toward the lows. And here's why this matters psychologically. The formants are what make you recognizable to others. When someone hears you speak, their brain is processing the formant structure. That's the primary information they use to identify your voice. The fundamental frequency matters, but the formants are more distinctive. You, however, have been focusing on the wrong frequencies. You've been hearing an enhanced fundamental and low harmonics. That's what feels salient to you. That's what your brain has associated with my voice. The formants are there, but they're not the dominant feature of your internal perception because they're balanced against the bone-conducted lows. So when you hear a recording, you're hearing yourself the way others hear you, formant, dominant, less bass heavy, and it sounds wrong because you're not used to the formants being the prominent feature. You're used to the bass being prominent, but the formants are the real information. They're what's actually distinctive about your voice. The bass boost from bone conduction is just added weight, not information. It makes your voice sound fuller to you, but it doesn't make it more you. Think about professional singers. They often hate their recorded voice too, even though they're supposed to be experts on vocal production. Why? Same reason. Bone conduction. They hear themselves with enhanced lows. They record themselves with accurate formants. The recording sounds thin to them, even though it sounds fine to everyone else. And some singers try to compensate. They sing with more chest voice, more bass, trying to make the recording sound like what they hear internally. But this often makes the recording sound unbalanced to listeners because now the bass is too prominent. They're trying to match their internal perception, instead of matching what actually sounds good externally. The solution is to trust the recording, trust the formants. The formants are the real you. The bass boost is an artifact of your internal perception. And once you understand this, once you focus on the formant structure instead of the fundamental frequency, the recorded voice starts to sound more familiar. Because the formants are there. They've always been there. You just weren't paying attention to them because the bone conduction was distracting you with enhanced bass. Feynman's approach to understanding perception. So how would Feynman approach this problem? Because that's really what we've been doing this entire time. We've been following the Feynman method, starting from first principles, building up, not accepting surface level explanations. Most people, when they ask why their voice sounds different on recording, they get answers like, it's because you hear yourself differently, or recordings distort your voice, or it's just weird. These are not explanations. These are descriptions. They describe the phenomenon without explaining the mechanism. Feynman would not accept this. Feynman would ask, what is actually happening physically? What are the sound waves doing? How are they propagating? What path are they taking? How is your ear processing them? What is the mechanism? And then he would break it down step by step. Start with what you know. Sound is vibration. Vibrations propagate through different media at different speeds. Your ear is a mechanical device that converts vibrations into neural signals. Okay, now build from there. When you speak, where does the vibration come from? Your vocal cords, where does it go? Two places, into the air and into your skeleton. Why two places? Because your vocal cords are connected to both air and solid tissue. Vibrations propagate into any medium that's mechanically coupled to the source. Fine. Now trace each path. Air conduction. Vibration in air propagates around your head, enters ear canal, hits eardrum, transfers through ossicles, enters cochlea, bone conduction, vibration in tissue, propagates through larynx and jaw, enters skull bone, propagates through skull, directly vibrates cochlea. Two paths, different media, different propagation speeds, different frequency responses. Now what happens when they meet? Superposition. Waves add mathematically. The cochlea doesn't distinguish the source. It just responds to the total vibration. So you hear the sum of both signals. But a microphone only picks up vibrations in air. It can't pick up vibrations in bone because those vibrations never enter the air. So a recording only captures one signal, not both. When you play back the recording, you're missing the bone conduction component. Therefore, it sounds different. That's the explanation. That's the mechanism. That's what's actually happening physically. No hand waving. No, it's just weird. Every step is grounded in known physics. This is the Feynman approach. Reduce the problem to fundamental principles. Identify the mechanisms. Trace the causation. Build up from simple, well-understood phenomena to complex, less understood phenomena. And never ever accept an explanation that's just words without physical content. Feynman would also test the explanation. If bone conduction is the reason, then blocking bone conduction should change your perception. And it does. If you wear earplugs and speak, you hear yourself more loudly through bone conduction because the air conduction path is blocked. If you listen to a recording while bone conduction is artificially introduced, which you can do with bone conduction headphones, the recording sounds more like your normal self-perception. These are tests, predictions. If the explanation is right, these things should happen, and they do. That's how you know you got the real mechanism, not just a plausible story. And Feynman would go further. He would ask, why does bone conduction emphasize low frequencies? And then you'd have to explain material properties, density, elasticity, frequency-dependent impedance, resonance. You'd have to go into the physics of wave propagation in solid media versus gases. Why does your skull resonate? Because it's a complex geometric structure with boundary conditions that create standing waves at certain frequencies. What determines those frequencies? The speed of sound in bone, the dimensions of the skull, the boundary conditions at the interfaces. Every question leads to another question. Every answer requires understanding the underlying mechanism. And you keep going until you hit bedrock, until you reach principles that are so fundamental, so well established, that you can build everything else on top of them. This is how you actually understand something. Not by memorizing facts, not by accepting authority, but by building it up yourself from first principles, by asking why and how until you can't ask anymore, by demanding physical mechanisms, not just verbal descriptions. And here's what Feynman would say about people who hate their recorded voice. He'd say, you're experiencing a discrepancy between two measurements, your internal measurement, what you hear when you speak, and an external measurement, what a microphone records. When two measurements disagree, you have to figure out which one is correct, or whether they're measuring different things. In this case, they're measuring different things. Your internal measurement includes bone conduction. The microphone doesn't. So they're not contradictory, they're just different. And if you want to know what you actually sound like to others, you have to trust the measurement that matches what others are measuring, which is the microphone. This is how science works. You don't trust your perception. You don't trust your intuition. You trust measurements. You trust reproducible objective data. And when your perception disagrees with the measurement, you update your perception, not the measurement. Most people do the opposite. They trust their perception and distrust the recording. They think the recording is wrong because it doesn't match how they hear themselves. But that's backwards. The recording is the ground truth. The recording is what actually exists in the air. Your perception is the one that's been biased by an internal signal that others can't access. Feynman would tell you, update your model. Your brain built a model of your voice based on biased data. Now you have better data. Use it. Recalibrate. Accept that you don't sound the way you thought you did, and move on. That's the Feynman approach. Start with physics. Build the explanation from mechanisms. Test it with predictions. Trust the measurements. Update your model when the data contradicts it, and never ever stop asking why. The wave equation applied to your voice. Let's get mathematical. Not because math makes things more complicated, but because math makes things precise. When you understand the wave equation, you understand exactly how sound propagates. No ambiguity, no hand-waving, pure mechanism. The wave equation is one of the most fundamental equations in physics. It describes how any disturbance propagates through a medium. And sound is just a disturbance. A pressure variation, a density fluctuation, a displacement of particles from equilibrium. The wave equation tells you how that disturbance evolves in space and time. Here's the one-dimensional wave equation, 2ut2 star v2 2ux2. What does this mean? U is the displacement, how far particles have moved from their rest position. T is time. X is position in space. B is the wave speed. The equation says that the acceleration of the displacement at any point, the second derivative with respect to time, equals the wave speed squared times the curvature of the displacement, the second derivative with respect to position. This is beautiful. This is saying that if there's curvature in the displacement, if particles are displaced more in one place than in neighboring places, that curvature creates acceleration. Particles accelerate toward regions of lower displacement. This acceleration propagates the wave forward at speed, RV, and v, the wave speed, depends on the medium. For sound in air, v sharks GPR, where g is the adiabatic index, p is pressure, r is density. For sound in solids, v sharks ER, where e is the elastic modulus. Different materials, different wave speeds. That's why sound travels faster in bone than in air. Bone has a higher elastic modulus. It's stiffer. Disturbances propagate faster. Now, when your vocal cords vibrate, they create a periodic displacement, let's say UT, narins a sin ot, where A is amplitude and O is angular frequency. This is the source. This displacement propagates outward as a wave. In air, the wave equation tells you that this displacement propagates at 343 mms. The solution is uxt in a sin otkx, where k-ov is the wave number. This describes a traveling wave. At any fixed position, x, the displacement oscillates in time. At any fixed time t, the displacement varies sinusoidally in space. In bone, the same source creates the same periodic displacement, but the wave equation has a different v, faster propagation. The wave number k is smaller because k shear ov and v is larger. This means the wavelength is longer in bone than in air for the same frequency. But here's where it gets interesting. The wave equation, as I wrote it, is for a simple homogeneous medium. Your body is not homogeneous. You have tissue, bone, fluid, air cavities. Each interface between materials creates boundary conditions. When a wave hits a boundary, part of it reflects, part of it transmits. The amplitudes of the reflected and transmitted waves depend on the impedance mismatch. The reflection coefficient is R for Z2, Z1, Z2 plus Z1, where Z is the acoustic impedance of each material. If Z2 bears Z1, most of the wave reflects. If Z2 Z1, most of the wave transmits. This is why bone-to-bone transmission is efficient and air-to-bone transmission is inefficient. The impedance mismatch determines the energy transfer. Now, your vocal tract is a complex geometry. It's not a simple one-dimensional tube. It's a three-dimensional cavity with varying cross-section. The wave equation in 3 dimensions is 2ut2 chaque vidant to u, where 2 is the Laplacian operator. This accounts for wave propagation in all directions. When sound propagates through your vocal tract, it's solving this 3-dimensional wave equation with complicated boundary conditions. The walls of your throat, the shape of your mouth, your tongue position, these are all boundaries. They create reflections, standing waves, resonances. The resonances are the formants. Mathematically, they're the eigenfrequencies of the cavity. They're the frequencies at which the boundary conditions allow standing waves to form. And standing waves are solutions to the wave equation of the form uxt, or ax sin ot, where ax describes a spatial pattern that doesn't change in time, it just oscillates in amplitude. These standing waves have nodes and antinodes. Points where the displacement is always 0, and points where the displacement is maximum. The frequencies at which these standing waves can exist are determined by the geometry. For a simple tube of length L, the resonant frequencies are F, and VR2L, where n is an integer. Change L by moving your tongue or jaw, and you change the resonant frequencies. You change the formants. So when your vocal cords vibrate at frequency F0, they create harmonics at 2F0, 3F0, 4F0, and so on. These harmonics propagate through your vocal tract, and the vocal tract selectively amplifies harmonics that match its resonant frequencies. Those amplified harmonics are the formants. The wave equation, combined with the boundary conditions of your vocal tract geometry, predicts exactly which frequencies get amplified. Now, bone conduction. When vibrations propagate through your skull, they're also solving the wave equation, but in a solid medium with different properties. Bone is anisotropic. Its properties depend on direction. The wave speed is different along the grain of the bone structure than across it, and bone supports both longitudinal waves, compression, rarefaction, like in air, and shear waves, sideways displacement that doesn't exist in fluids. The full description requires tensor notation. The stress-strain relationship in bone is a tensor equation, but the key point is that different frequencies propagate with different efficiency. The wave equation in bone has frequency-dependent attenuation. High frequencies get damped out faster than low frequencies because the microscopic structure of bone scatters short wavelength waves more than long wavelength waves. Mathematically, you can model this with a complex wave number, k Girard, k real plus ik imag. The real part describes propagation. The imaginary part describes attenuation, and k imag depends on frequency. Higher frequency, higher k imag, faster attenuation. This is why bone conduction emphasizes low frequencies. It's in the wave equation. The mathematical description of wave propagation in bone inherently includes frequency-dependent damping. You can measure it. You can calculate it from first principles using the material properties of bone, and it predicts exactly what we observe: bass-heavy bone conduction, full-spectrum air conduction. When you hear yourself speak, your cochlea is receiving the superposition of two solutions to the wave equation. One solution is for propagation through air with air's boundary conditions. The other solution is for propagation through bone with bone's boundary conditions. Both solutions start from the same source, your vibrating vocal cords, but they evolve differently because the medium is different. The wave equation is deterministic. Given the source and the medium properties, the solution is unique. There's no ambiguity. The math tells you exactly what happens. And when you work through the math, you get exactly what we've been describing. Two different signals reaching your cochlea, combining through superposition, creating a perception that's different from what a microphone captures. This is the power of physics. You can write down an equation, the wave equation, and from that equation, from the properties of materials, from geometry and boundary conditions, you can predict precisely how sound will behave. And those predictions match reality every time. The wave equation is not a metaphor. It's a precise mathematical description of physical reality, and your voice obeys it exactly. Experimental verification you can try, so let's stop talking theory and start talking experiments, because you can verify all of this yourself right now. You don't need fancy equipment, you don't need a lab, you just need your own body and some simple tools. Experiment. 1. The humming test. Just hum at a comfortable pitch. Notice how it sounds. Now, while humming, plug your ears. Stick your fingers in your ear canals and block them completely. What happens? The sound gets louder, significantly louder. You hear yourself more clearly, not less. Why? Because you've blocked the air conduction path. Sound can't enter your ear canal from outside, but the bone conduction path is still wide open. Vibrations are still traveling from your vocal cords through your jaw and skull to your cochlea, and now that's the only signal you're hearing. This proves bone conduction exists. If all sound traveled through air, blocking your ears would make you silent to yourself. But it doesn't. It makes you louder. The internal path is independent of the external path. Now try this variation. Hum with your ears plugged, then unplug them. Notice how the sound changes. It doesn't just get quieter. The quality changes. It becomes less bass heavy, more thin. That's the air conduction signal adding to the mix, diluting the bass heavy bone conduction signal. Experiment 2, the tuning fork test. Get a tuning fork, any frequency, but 256 Hertz or 512 Hertz works well. Strike it so it's vibrating. Hold it in the air near your ear. You hear a tone. That's air conduction. The vibrating fork creates sound waves in air. Those waves enter your ear. You hear it. Now, while the fork is still vibrating, touch the base of it to your skull. Touch it to your mastoid process, the bony bump behind your ear, or touch it to your forehead, or the top of your head, anywhere on your skull. What happens? The sound gets louder, much louder, and it sounds different. It sounds like it's coming from inside your head, not from outside. That's bone conduction. The vibrations from the fork are transferring directly into your skull bone. Your bone is conducting those vibrations to your cochlea. You're hearing the fork through bone, not through air. Now here's the key test. While the fork is touching your skull, plug your ears. The sound doesn't disappear. It doesn't even get much quieter. Why? Because the sound is traveling through bone, not air. Blocking your ear canal doesn't block the bone conduction path. This is actually a medical test. It's called the Weber test. Doctors use it to diagnose hearing loss. If you have conductive hearing loss, damage to your eardrum or ossicles, bone conduction sounds louder in the affected ear because the damaged ear can't hear air-conducted sound well. But bone conduction bypasses the damaged structures. If you have sensorineural hearing loss, damage to your cochlea or auditory nerve, bone conduction sounds quieter in the affected ear because the damaged structures can't process any sound, whether it comes from air or bone. Experiment 3, the recording comparison. Record yourself speaking, just a simple voice memo on your phone. A minute of natural speech. Then play it back immediately while you remember how you sounded to yourself. Notice the difference. Your recorded voice sounds thinner, higher pitched, less resonant. That's the missing bone conduction. Now, while the recording is playing, hum along with your own voice. Try to match the pitch and tone of the recording. Feel the vibrations in your skull while you hum. Those vibrations, the ones you feel while humming, those are what's missing from the recording. The recording captured the sound in air. It didn't capture the vibrations in your skull. And when you compare the two, you can directly experience what bone conduction adds. Experiment 4, the direct comparison. This one requires a partner. Have someone else speak while you listen. Notice their voice. Then have them hum while you put your hand on their skull, on their jaw, their cheekbone, their forehead. You'll feel vibrations, not sound. Mechanical vibrations. That's their bone conduction. Now you try. Hum while they touch your skull. They feel your vibrations. But they can't hear those vibrations the way you hear them because those vibrations are inside your skull. They're not entering the air in significant amounts. They're trapped inside bone. You're feeling them from outside, but hearing them from inside is completely different. This shows you that bone conduction is a private signal. It exists for you. Other people can detect it with touch, but they can't hear it. Only you hear it because only you have the internal path from your vocal cords to your cochlea through your skeleton. Experiment. 5. The bone conduction headphones. Test. If you have access to bone conduction headphones, they're not expensive, you can buy them online. Try this. Put them on. They sit on your mastoid process or your cheekbone, not in your ear canal. Play music through them. You'll hear the music clearly, but it sounds different from normal headphones. It sounds like it's coming from inside your head. And if you plug your ears while listening, the music doesn't get quieter. It might even get slightly louder because you're eliminating ambient noise. This is proof that you can hear through bone alone. The headphones aren't putting sound in the air, they're vibrating your skull directly. And your cochlea picks up those vibrations and processes them as sound. This is the same mechanism you use to hear yourself speak. Same physics, same pathway. Now, record yourself speaking and play it back through bone conduction headphones. It sounds more like how you hear yourself normally. More bass, more resonance, because you're adding back the bone conduction component that's missing from the recording. You're artificially recreating the full signal, air plus bone, and your brain recognizes it as closer to your normal self-perception. Experiment. 6. The isolation test. Speak while wearing earplugs or noise-canceling headphones. Block the air conduction path as much as possible. Your voice sounds boomy, bass-heavy, unnatural. That's isolated bone conduction. You're hearing almost entirely through bone because very little air-conducted sound is getting through. Now speak normally without ear protection. Your voice sounds normal to you, balanced, clear. That's the combination of air and bone conduction. And if you record this and play it back, it sounds different again, thinner. That's air conduction alone. 3 different perceptions. Isolated bone conduction, boomy, bass-heavy, combined air and bone, normal to you. Isolated air conduction, recording, thin, unfamiliar. The same physical event, you speaking, creating 3 different perceptual experiences depending on which signal paths are active. Every one of these experiments is reproducible. Every one of them demonstrates a specific physical principle. Bone conduction exists. It has different frequency response than air conduction. It's a private signal. It can be isolated or combined with air conduction. And when you experience these experiments directly, you stop wondering whether the physics is real. You know it's real because you just measured it with your own body. Evolution and why we evolved bone conduction. Now let's ask a different question. Why does bone conduction exist at all? This isn't a physics question. This is an evolutionary biology question. What advantage does it provide? Why did natural selection preserve this mechanism? Because, make no mistake, bone conduction isn't an accident. It's not a side effect. It's a feature. Your auditory system is designed to process both air-conducted and bone-conducted sound. Your cochlea responds to vibrations regardless of source. The structures of your skull conduct vibrations efficiently. This is built in. Evolve. So what's it for? First, self-monitoring. When you speak, you need to hear yourself, not just to know that sound is coming out, but to monitor the quality of your vocalization, pitch, volume, articulation. You need real-time feedback to control your voice, and bone conduction provides that feedback instantly. Why is this important? because air conduction has a delay. Sound has to propagate from your mouth around your head into your ear canal. That's maybe 20 centimeters at 343 ms, about 0.6 milliseconds. Not much, but not zero. Bone conduction is faster, shorter path, faster propagation speed, maybe 0.1 milliseconds or less. That faster feedback matters for fine motor control. When you're speaking, your brain is constantly adjusting. Tongue position, jaw position, vocal cord tension. These adjustments need feedback, and bone conduction provides immediate feedback before the air-conducted signal arrives. It gives your brain a head start on error correction. Think about singers. They need to hear themselves to stay on pitch. If you introduce a delay in auditory feedback, even a few hundred milliseconds, singers start singing off-key. They can't correct in real time because the feedback is too delayed. Bone conduction reduces that delay. It provides fast internal feedback that helps maintain vocal control. Second, distinguishing internal from external sounds. Your brain needs to know which sounds are coming from you and which sounds are coming from the environment. This is important for filtering, for attention, for communication in noisy environments. Bone conduction provides a signal that only exists when you're vocalizing. It's a tag. It says this sound is from me. External sounds don't create bone conduction in your skull. Only your own vocalizations do, so your brain can use the presence of bone conduction to identify self-generated sounds and process them differently from environmental sounds. This is why you can hear someone else talking in a noisy room, but you can always hear yourself talking, even in the same noise. Your brain is filtering. It's using the bone conduction signal to identify which sounds are yours, and giving those sounds preferential processing. Noise suppression for external sounds, enhancement for your own voice. Third, monitoring internal body sounds. Bone conduction doesn't just carry speech, it carries all vibrations in your body. Chewing, swallowing, your heartbeat, breathing. These create vibrations that propagate through your skeleton and reach your cochlea. These sounds are important. Chewing sounds tell you about the texture and consistency of food. Is it crunchy, soft, tough? This helps you decide how much to chew before swallowing. Swallowing sounds tell you whether you're swallowing correctly or whether something might be stuck. Breathing sounds can indicate congestion or airway problems. You don't consciously attend to most of these sounds, but your brain monitors them, and if something is abnormal, it gets flagged. You notice. This is internal body monitoring, and bone conduction is the mechanism. Without bone conduction, you'd have no access to these internal sounds. They don't radiate into the air strongly enough for air conduction to pick them up. They're trapped inside your body. Bone conduction is the only way to hear them. Fourth, evolutionary history. Our ancestors, fish, then amphibians, then early reptiles, didn't hear the way we do. They didn't have external ears or middle ear ossicles. They heard primarily through bone conduction. Vibrations in the water or ground would travel through their skull to their inner ear. That was the dominant hearing mechanism. As vertebrates evolved and moved onto land, air conduction became more important. The middle ear evolved to bridge the impedance gap between air and fluid. External ears evolved to collect sound waves. But bone conduction was already there. It's the ancestral mechanism. We didn't lose it because it's still useful. It still provides advantages, so we kept both. Air conduction for environmental sounds, bone conduction for self-monitoring and internal sounds. Two systems, both functional, both advantageous. And here's the interesting part. Because bone conduction was the original mechanism and air conduction evolved later, your auditory system is actually built around bone conduction. Your cochlea doesn't distinguish between them. It's designed to respond to vibrations from any source. Bone conduction isn't a weird add-on. It's the foundation. Air conduction is the add-on. This is why bone conduction affects your perception so strongly. It's not a minor signal. It's a major input channel that your brain has been using for your entire evolutionary history. Your perception of your own voice is shaped by millions of years of evolution that prioritized bone conduction as a self-monitoring mechanism. And this is why the disconnect with recordings is so jarring. The recording removes a signal channel that evolution spent millions of years optimizing. Your brain expects bone conduction. It's built to process bone conduction. When it's suddenly absent, your brain doesn't just notice a difference. It notices the absence of a fundamental input that's supposed to be there. This isn't just about physics. This is about biology, about how your body is designed, about why you're built this way. And understanding the evolutionary context helps you understand why the phenomenon is so universal, so powerful, so resistant to conscious override. You're not fighting a quirk. You're fighting millions of years of evolutionary optimization. Point 19, professional voice training and this knowledge. So what do professionals do about this? Singers, voice actors, public speakers, people who need to know what they actually sound like, not what they think they sound like. How do they deal with the bone conduction problem? Simple. They train themselves to ignore their internal perception and trust external feedback. Professional singers record themselves constantly, not occasionally, constantly. Every practice session, every rehearsal, every performance. They listen back. They compare what they heard while singing to what the recording captured. And over time, they build a new mental model. They learn what their external voice sounds like. They recalibrate. This is not natural. This is trained. Your brain doesn't want to do this. Your brain wants to trust the combined signal, air plus bone conduction, because that's what it's been processing your entire life. But professionals force their brain to update. They expose themselves to the air-only signal so frequently that their brain has to build a new reference. And here's what happens. After enough exposure, enough recalibration, they stop being shocked by recordings. They can listen to themselves and recognize it as me without the cognitive dissonance. They've updated their self-model, but they go further than that. They learn to predict. While they're singing, they try to predict what the recording will sound like. They use the air conduction component of their perception and mentally subtract the bone conduction component. They're doing real-time filtering in their brain, trying to estimate the external signal from the combined signal. This is incredibly difficult. It requires massive amounts of practice, but professional singers can do it. They sing. They immediately know whether it sounded good externally or whether it only sounded good internally. And they adjust. More breath support, different vowel shape, different resonance strategy. They're using the prediction to guide their vocal production. Voice actors do the same thing. They work in recording studios. They wear headphones that feed them their own voice with minimal latency. This gives them immediate access to the air-conducted signal. They speak, they hear themselves through the headphones, and they adjust in real time. The headphones are crucial. Without headphones, they'd hear themselves primarily through bone conduction, same as everyone else. The headphones provide external feedback while they're speaking, not after. This creates a tight feedback loop. Speak, hear external version, adjust, speak again, hear adjustment, refine, over and over until they can produce exactly the sound they want externally, regardless of what they're hearing internally through bone conduction. Public speakers use a different strategy. They focus on clarity and projection, not tonal quality. They train themselves to speak in a way that ensures intelligibility in large spaces, and they use recordings to verify that their projection is working. But they're less concerned with the timbral differences between their internal perception and external reality, because intelligibility doesn't depend as much on those differences. As long as the words are clear, the formants are right, the volume is adequate, they're successful. But here's the key insight that all professionals learn. Your internal perception is unreliable for judging external sound quality. You cannot trust what you hear when you speak. You need external feedback. Recording devices, other people's ears, sound engineers. These are your ground truth. Your internal perception is useful for monitoring your vocal effort, your breath support, your articulation. But it's not useful for judging what you sound like to others. Some professionals go even further. They train with bone conduction headphones, they play music or reference tracks through bone conduction while speaking, which adds a controlled signal to their bone conduction path. This helps them separate the bone-conducted component from the air-conducted component in their perception. It's a form of sensory training that makes them more aware of which parts of their perception are internal and which are external. And there's another technique, proprioceptive feedback. Instead of relying on auditory feedback, they focus on how their body feels when they produce certain sounds. Tension in the throat, position of the tongue, resonance in the chest or head. These physical sensations are consistent regardless of bone conduction. A professional can learn to produce a specific sound by recreating specific physical sensations, and those physical sensations reliably produce the same external sound. This is actually more reliable than auditory feedback because it bypasses the whole bone conduction problem. You're not listening to yourself, you're feeling yourself. And proprioceptive signals don't have the air versus bone ambiguity. Your throat feels the same way whether you're hearing yourself through bone or through air. But all of this requires training, deliberate, focused, extended training. Most people never do this. They go their entire lives trusting their internal perception, and they're perpetually confused when recordings don't match their expectations. Professionals don't have that luxury. Their career depends on producing specific sounds that satisfy external listeners. So they learn to distrust their own ears and trust external feedback. It's counterintuitive, it's difficult, but it's necessary. And once you understand the physics, once you understand that bone conduction is real and significant and unavoidable, the professional approach makes perfect sense. You can't eliminate bone conduction. It's always there when you speak, but you can learn to mentally filter it out. You can learn to predict the external signal. You can learn to trust recordings over perception. And once you do, you gain control over your actual voice, not just your perceived voice. The broader physics lesson. So let's step back. Let's talk about what this whole phenomenon teaches us, not just about voice, about physics, about perception, about reality. Here's the lesson. Your perception is not reality. It's a model, a representation, a reconstruction based on limited, biased sensory data. And that model can be systematically wrong in ways you never notice because you have no access to ground truth except through external measurement. You thought you knew what your voice sounded like. You've heard it thousands of times, millions of times, every time you speak. and yet you were wrong, not slightly wrong, significantly wrong. Your voice sounds noticeably different to everyone else than it does to you, and you had no idea. This is humbling. This is a reminder that subjective experience is not objective reality. You are not directly perceiving the world. You are perceiving signals from your sensory organs, and your brain is constructing a model from those signals. And that model is shaped by the signals available to you, which may include signals that don't exist for anyone else. Bone conduction is invisible to external observers. Nobody else can hear it. Nobody else can measure it without invasive contact. It's a private signal. And it's been distorting your self-perception your entire life. Now, physics gives us the tools to understand this. The wave equation tells us how sound propagates. Material properties tell us why bone and air conduct differently. Impedance matching tells us why energy transfers efficiently through some boundaries and not others. Superposition tells us how signals combine. Frequency response tells us why different paths emphasize different frequencies. All of this is quantifiable, measurable, predictable. You can write down equations and calculate exactly what should happen. And when you test it, the calculations match reality. This is the power of physics. Not to give you comfort, not to confirm your intuitions, to show you what's actually happening, even when it contradicts your experience. And here's the deeper lesson. This phenomenon, this disconnect between internal perception and external reality, is not unique to voice. It's everywhere. Your vision is not reality. You have a blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve exits, but your brain fills it in so seamlessly that you never notice. Your color perception is relative, not absolute. Your brain adjusts color balance based on context so that white looks white under different lighting, even though the actual wavelengths are completely different. Your sense of time is not reality. Time passes faster when you're engaged, slower when you're bored, not subjectively, actually. Your brain's internal clock runs at different rates depending on attention and arousal. An hour of fun feels shorter than an hour of boredom, and this isn't just a feeling. Your memory of the hour is compressed or expanded based on how your brain processed time during the experience. Your sense of your body is not reality. Your brain has a body map, a representation of where your limbs are and what they're doing. But this map can be wrong. Phantom limbs, proprioceptive drift, the rubber hand illusion. Your brain can be convinced that a fake hand is yours. Your perception of your body is a model, and models can be manipulated. All of this is to say, perception is not direct, it's constructed. And constructions can be flawed, biased, incomplete. You experience the world through your sensory organs and your brain's processing, and both of those can systematically distort reality in ways you don't notice because you have no comparison. Physics helps you notice. Physics gives you external measurements. Objective data, when your perception disagrees with the measurement, you know your perception is the problem. And you can investigate. You can figure out why the perception is distorted. You can identify the mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, you can correct for it. This is what we've done with voice. We identified the mechanism, bone conduction. We explained why it distorts perception. Different propagation paths, different frequency responses, superposition in the cochlea. We showed how to measure ground truth, recording devices that capture only air conduction. And we explained how to update your model, exposure to recordings, recalibration, trusting external feedback. This is the scientific method applied to everyday experience. Notice a phenomenon, ask why. Build a model from first principles. Test the model, refine the model, and accept the results even when they contradict your intuition. Most people don't do this. They trust their perception. They assume their experience is reality. And when measurements disagree, they distrust the measurements. That recording doesn't sound like me. Yes, it does. You sound like that. You just don't hear yourself that way because of bone conduction. Physics forces intellectual humility. It forces you to accept that you can be wrong about things you experience directly, that your senses can be systematically biased, that objective measurement is more trustworthy than subjective experience. And this is uncomfortable. Nobody likes being told they're wrong about their own perception, but it's necessary. Because reality doesn't care about your perception. Reality is what it is, regardless of how you experience it. And if you want to understand reality, you have to be willing to distrust your experience and trust the measurements. This is the broader lesson. This is what Feynman understood. This is what physics teaches. The universe is not obligated to make sense to you. It's not obligated to match your intuitions. It's not obligated to feel right. It just has to be consistent. It has to obey laws. And those laws can be discovered through measurement and experimentation, even when they contradict everything you thought you knew. Your voice sounds different on recording because of physics. Real, measurable, quantifiable physics. Wave propagation, frequency response. Impedance matching, superposition, all of it predictable from first principles. And once you understand the physics, the phenomenon stops being mysterious. It becomes obvious. Of course your voice sounds different on recording. How could it not? You're hearing a different signal, a subset of what you normally hear, the external component only without the internal component. And this realization, this understanding that your perception is systematically different from external reality, this should change how you think about everything. Not just voice, everything. Your senses are providing you with a constructed model of reality, not reality itself. And that model is useful for survival, for navigation, for interaction. But it's not truth. Truth comes from measurement, from external verification, from physics, from demanding mechanisms, not just descriptions. From asking why until you hit bedrock. From building models that make predictions and testing those predictions against reality. This is the lesson. This is what physics teaches you. Not just about sound waves and bone conduction, about the nature of knowledge itself, about how to distinguish perception from reality, about how to actually understand something instead of just thinking you understand it. And that's worth learning, not because it makes you comfortable, because it makes you accurate. And accuracy, not comfort, is what lets you navigate reality effectively. That's the beauty of physics. Not that it confirms what you already believe, that it shows you what's actually true, even when the truth is strange, uncomfortable, and completely contrary to your everyday experience. Your voice sounds different on recording. Now you know why. And more importantly, now you know how to think about problems like this, how to break them down, how to identify mechanisms, how to test explanations, how to trust measurements over perception. That's the real lesson. That's what makes this worth understanding. Not the specific fact about voice, but the general method for understanding reality. And that method works for everything, absolutely everything.